Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band podcast. I'm your host, Benedict Hein, and today we're going to talk about something I think we haven't covered yet on this episode. We talk about recording electronic drum kits versus like real drum kits and versus like programming MIDI drums, like actually playing with an electronic kit. There's a couple of reasons for why we wanted to cover that because, recording actual acoustic drums is pretty hard and not everybody can do that. It's not an option for everyone. There's many reasons for that and we're going to go through this. And what you can do if you can't record real drums is you can use MIDI drums and you can draw them by hand, like program them by drawing MIDI notes. You can use a small controller, or there's different ways to do it. But if you want the feel of a real drum kit and you want to actually play it, you could use electronic drum kits. Now, that sounds like a simple solution, but there's a couple of like things that you have to watch out for. It's not as easy as it sounds. And so we wanted to make this episode. And we brought in our like Dr. Drums, as I always call him, Thomas, onto the episode. Thomas is my partner engineer in the studio, and he's doing a lot of drum work for me or for the bands we work with. And I've just mixed a song actually today with like MIDI drums that he, I think, played on electronic drum kit, and those were some of the best sounding and best feeling drums I've mixed in a while. And so naturally, I wanted to bring him on to talk about this with us. So welcome, Thomas. Welcome, Malcolm. Welcome, Malcolm. I've never said that.
Oh, really?
So I'm not doing this alone, as always. I'm here with my wonderful co-host and friend, Malcolm Owen Flood, and of course, Thomas Grottenthaler. Hello. Welcome, guys.
Welcome, Malcolm. Welcome, Ben.
Yeah.
Nice to be
Welcome,
here.
Thomas, man. It's great to have you back on the podcast.
Yeah, finally.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for taking the time to do this, you guys. It's a little different for me to not just talk to Malcolm, but to two people again. But we're going to get through this. We're going to make this a cool episode. And I hope that, Thomas can share insights from his experience of working on so many records with like all kinds of different drums and also like these MIDI drums that have been played on electronic kit. Now, so before we do this, let's not skip our banter. I don't know. Do you want to guys share anything that is maybe related, maybe not?
I mean, I am getting to test out a new fuzz plugin that is like the best thing ever. So I'm excited about that, but that's really all I can say right now. It's going to be awesome, though. It's the final frontier of plugins, right? Like that's the only thing that hasn't been like knocked out of the park by like every brand is fuzz. So it's pretty cool that that's coming out and kicking ass now.
Yeah, totally.
I started to take guitar lessons. And
oh, really? Did you?
Yeah. I play guitar for 10 or 12 years now. I'm just self-taught, but I managed to get a teacher.
Awesome. And since like for how long have you been doing that? Like the lessons?
2 weeks for now.
Okay, cool. Now, you're a teacher yourself, right? You're a drum teacher. So was it hard for you to find a good teacher that you like the teaching style of and all of that? Like, it's kind of meta? Like, do you kind of analyze how they teach and what works for you and what not?
So the guitar teacher at the music school where I am actually said to me that he wants to learn how to play the drums. So I said, you give me guitar lessons, I give you drum lessons.
All right, perfect.
Awesome. So I always recommend that people guitarists take drum lessons because I think guitarists generally have a very poor understanding of rhythm. And it's like just taking drum lessons is such an essential skill for musicianship in general. But drummers, they don't always go the other way around and learn guitar. So that's kind of cool. Are you learning just out of desire to be able to play it better, or is it motivated by wanting to be a better drummer?
No, it's actually just because I want to play better guitar. And, I can do chords. I can do, what are they called? Bar chords?
Bar chords, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bar chords.
And,
everybody's favorite.
Yeah. I can do all of that, a little bit of pentatonic stuff. Some licks, but nothing really fancy. So I decided to level up my skills.
Yeah, you'll have fun with it, I'm sure.
Yeah, totally. Always a good thing. Cool. Awesome. Now, before I say something incorrect, Thomas, I just finished the Joe Altman song today. You played that on electronic drums, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, because I was so fascinated because this was like a perfect preparation for this episode today. Because as I said, those were some of the best sounding and also feeling drums I've mixed in a while, and like honestly, and part of it is the sampler that you used, of course, and like how you put together and layered the samples and all of that. So great work there. That was awesome. But also the playing and like how realistic it sounds. It was kind of mind blowing. So I hope we can unpack some of that today. How you actually did that. And yeah, let's start maybe with the why. Like, why is it why is it a good idea to use like an electronic kit versus like a real kit, or versus like drawing in MIDI notes with your hands? Like, let's talk about situations where an electronic drum kit is the weapon of choice, sort of.
Real quick, before, can I just jump in? I want to clarify that I think some people might not realize that you can use electronic kits to get, what you're saying, real sounding drums.
Oh, yeah.
So some people might think, okay, you would use electronic drums to program like drum sounds, but you can use what we're talking about. I mean, we can talk about both, but in this case, we're talking about as an alternative method of achieving, quotation marks, real sounding drums, using an kit just to capture a performance, and then using software to give us the sounds we want, and in this case, like make it sound like a real kit.
So imagine you take a MIDI keyboard and use one of the best, violin samplers out there, and nothing else is an electronic drum kit combined with a good virtual instrument for drums.
Mm-hmm. Which is fascinating, because then in theory you could also record an incredible drum performance using a piano if you were extremely skilled with your fingers.
Totally. So I think, I think that there are some listeners who have tried using electronic drum kits before and maybe failed because it's not like as simple as it sounds. So I think that so the why is partly, a real drum kit is not, as I said, not always an option for many people because of the room, because of maybe the lack of a really good drum kit. Maybe you don't have enough mics or bad mics, or not enough mics or enough channels, input channels, that sort of stuff. Not enough experience with tracking real drums. So there's a lot of reasons for why you can't record acoustic drums. But then when you decided to do it MIDI, then as I said, maybe some people have tried using an electronic kit but failed, and then decided to draw the MIDI notes in by hand or use a small controller, and that doesn't really feel great. They want to play it. So that's really why we wanted to do this episode and explain how to do it properly, basically. And so, what you say are the advantages of using an electronic drum kit? Why would you want to use that? I mean, the obvious one is like it feels like a drum kit, but is it faster? Is it easier? Does it sound better? Like, can you do, why, when and why would you use it? Because I don't think you've used it on all the, you don't use it on every single project, So sometimes you just choose to program it differently.
So one, it's way quicker than writing every note with the mouse. If you have your recording set up, if it's set up, And the other thing is that timing is a big issue when you just want to write it with the mouse. You can't do that, basically. So that are the two main reasons for me. Feel and timing and groove, that are the two reasons why I would use an electronic drum kit. But acoustic drum kits are always better from when you think about the feel. Acoustic drum kits are always better,
You mean how it feels when you're playing? Like, how it feels to the drummer? Okay, yeah. Okay, we're going to talk about that. There's different ways to make an electronic drum kit feel better. It depends on the kit, I think, you use mainly, and a couple of other things maybe. Then let's just go through how to actually do it properly, because that's what I think is the most important thing here. So there's different ways to record electronic drum kits, and I think we have to explain first what that actually is, like how it works, because I know that so many people do it the wrong way, or don't know what you can actually do with it. Because you can, obviously, you don't mic it. I mean, it's an electronic thing, so it just sounds like cardboard if you put a microphone on it. But you can record its outputs, and there's different ones. You could record one stereo output of the whole kit, which gives you stereo recording of a full drum kit, but you have very little control over that in the mix, and you are very limited when it comes to choosing good sounding samples.
just real quick on the stereo output, that is there's totally a place for that. Like it's really great for like demos, where you just like want to make a decent sounding capture of the song, and have drums that don't sound like, if you just don't have the ability to record great acoustic drums but you own an E-kit, grabbing the stereo out is going to sound pretty awesome because the sounds are like pretty pre-mixed usually. So it's a great little quick solution to getting like quick and dirty good drums down, but just you can't mix them at all because it's all printed. So there's a time and a place for it, is all I'm saying, kind of thing. But ultimately, the goal of this episode is to take you way past that.
Yes, exactly. And you got to know how it actually works, I think, first. So those pads, when you look at an electronic drum kit, it consists of pads that are that replace the actual drums and cymbals, and those just detect the hits basically. And there's like better ones, cheaper ones, but basically what they do is they detect which drum is being hit and how hard it is hit, and sometimes where you hit it, like center or off center, depending on the pad you use, that sort of stuff. And it translates that into MIDI information, MIDI notes, and those MIDI notes can then are then sent, if you just practice with it with headphones, for example. Those MIDI notes, this MIDI information is being sent to a module, or like Malcolm told us, it's called the brain. Over there, you call it the brain of the kit. We always say module, like there's a small computer attached to it, and that one has a sampler, and the MIDI information that goes into this brain of the kit will then trigger those samples. So when you hit the pad for the snare drum, the module knows, now I have to play a snare drum. And you can, and this module, this brain has outputs. So you can, as we said, record the stereo out. It's like kind of pre-mixed, and you get the whole kit at once. Sometimes they have multiple outputs, so you can record one output per drum or a cymbal, which is kind of similar to recording like a drum kit with multiple mics. But then again, you can only choose the samples that this sampler, this computer gives you, that is built in. And then the third and most flexible way is you can capture the MIDI information and then use whatever sampler you have in the computer and choose the samples there. And that is what gives you the most flexibility, and also the ability to actually edit and adjust your performance, because not all of these drum kits capture it really accurately, get the dynamics right and all of that. So these are basically the three ways I can think of. Is that about correct, Thomas? Like you can capture stereo, multi-out audio, or MIDI?
Right. So stereo output is probably good for just arranging or songwriting, if you want a quick method to record your electronic drum kit. There are multi-outputs, and I believe like one of the higher end modules, like the Roland TD50, and that's in the 2,000 plus bucks range, has 8 outputs for kick, snare, hats, ride, and there are toms left and right, so you get the toms on one stereo track and the overheads on left and right. So that's good for live situations, right? If you send those outputs to the mixer. But for recording, I always would go with the MIDI.
What should someone get if they think about using an electronic drum kit, or if they have one? How do they know if it's good enough? Like, what would you say? How good does it have to be, and what does it cost to get a good one?
Yes, that's a very interesting question, and I think it's very subjective. The track you mentioned before, I used a Roland TD1 drum module. That's one of the most affordable drum modules out there. It's about 150 or 200 bucks.
But you're talking about the brain, the module.
Yeah, the module, the brain. It almost has no features and no settings, but you can do it with that too. And it's enough. It's really enough. When you do a little bit of MIDI editing, I think that is key to edit the MIDI later.
And what about the pads, though? Because the module is one thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's basically the interface to the computer. But what about the actual pads? What's the difference there, and how expensive do they have to be?
Yeah, right. So basically, there are 3 different kind of pads. There are mono pads, stereo pads, and digital pads. So mono pads are the typical black rubber things, and you will get one articulation out of that mono pad. If you have a stereo pad, like a snare drum, often it has it's a stereo pad, and it has a rim articulation and a head articulation.
You said stereo pad. Just to not to confuse people, it's still it still outputs a mono signal. It's just called that because it has two different articulations built into one pad, right? It's not like, we're not talking stereo mono in terms of left and right, but it has like two outputs.
Yeah, right. It has two outputs, and the cable is actually a stereo cable, right? So it's not left-right. It's just one pad that has more than one articulation, and therefore is used a stereo cable, right? So you have a rim, for example, on a snare drum, a rim articulation, a head articulation, and a rim shot if you play both at the same time. There also are digital pads that give you way more zones, basically, because a digital pad can divide the head into different zones. So you get a center, a off center, a edge, for example, articulation, all on the head, then a rim shot. And there are also some pads that detect when you rest your hand on the mesh head, and if you want to play a side stick, for example. Digital pads are really expensive. Do you really need a digital pad? That's the question here, because most of the times when you play a rock song or something heavy, you just want a hard rim shot, and that's all you want most of the time, right?
Yeah.
And there are a few fills in every song where you want a little bit like off center and a rim shot, like not so hard or something like that. You can edit that later in the MIDI. And that's why I chose a pretty cheap module, because the high-end modules are really expensive, and the high-end kits are really expensive.
Okay, so you need, if you have like one of those digital pads, you need a different module for that too, just so people can follow along. Like the cheap module can't do that, right? If you have a pad with like multiple zones and all that stuff you talked about, you then also need a better module, and that makes it all like expensive quickly, right?
Yeah, you need a module that has the connectivity for digital pads.
Okay.
And you need a digital pad.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, so again, what would you say is like the minimum that people would have to spend, or like what should they be looking at? From what I heard is like probably at least the stereo pad, so you can have like a rim and a head, but like that's about all you need for the snare drum. You probably want mesh heads and not like the hard rubber pads, probably. And so would you say like an entry-level mesh head kit with some decent module is a good place to start?
Yeah, of course. So the way I built my drum kit, my electronic drum kit, was I bought a used Roland TD1 module. I bought everything used on eBay, but I bought one stereo snare pad with a mesh head and a few of these old mono rubber black tom pads. And a few cymbal pads.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I've chosen that because why should I spend more money on pads that give me one articulation, right?
Yeah.
So I don't need more than one articulation on a tom. And if there's a part where the rim of the tom is hit, I can do that later with a MIDI.
I'm even more impressed now because the tom fills in this song that I've mixed sound really natural, and I always imagined, I have no experience, but I've always imagined like those hard rubber pads, they just don't feel right, or maybe the stick bounces weird in a weird way or something, and like those fills that you played there, they are dynamic, they sound exactly like I would play them on a real kit, and so you did all of that with those hard black rubber pads, basically.
Yep.
This is pretty interesting. Okay.
It seems to me like a way to simplify the whole idea is that you can really go as bare bones and basic and cheap as you want, because you're able to fix it in the MIDI editing in your DAW, which is really cool. So if the more realistic you want your drum performance to be right out of your performance of actually playing it, the more money you need to spend. But Thomas seems to be saying that, yeah, you can do that if you want, but you can also just keep it a really simple, bare bones, affordable kit, and then add whatever you want in the humanization, in the dynamics, or even changing articulation sounds in the DAW after the fact as well.
Exactly. Right.
Cool. And so if someone has never played on an electronic drum kit like that, and they built this hybrid affordable kit like you did, does it take a lot of like getting used to it? Does it feel really bad, or is it like, can you immediately go from playing your real kit to tracking the same thing on the electronic kit?
Yeah, I think you can immediately go from your acoustic kit to that, but it will never feel really good, right? So even if you buy one of those higher end things with that full size shells, and there you are in the 5,000-6,000 range, they never feel like a real kit, because it's different. It's just different. And I thought, why should I spend that crazy amount of money if it never feels like really good?
Okay, fair enough. So how much overall did you spend for your setup? Just so people know, the used setup that you just talked about?
Maybe $600-700.
That's great.
Around about that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Really cool. How do you set it up so you can monitor whatever samples you're choosing in the computer? Like, can you actually do that, or do you have to listen to what the module puts out? And if you can monitor through the computer and choose your sample library of choice, how do you set that up so that the library reacts correctly to what you're doing, so that a ghost note is actually a ghost note, and a loud hit is a loud hit, and an open hi-hat is open, and all that types of things? Like, how do you do that? Is that difficult? Can you do something wrong here? Does it work out of the box? Is it like plug and play? What's that process look like?
All right. So if you want to monitor yourself through your computer, you have to have a computer that can handle that. You need to have a low enough buffer size, so you don't have a great much of a delay. But if your computer can handle that, just search for a drum library, a virtual instrument that has something like a electronic drum kit preset or some kind of setup. For example, the Room Sound libraries from the company Room Sound, they have something like a eDrum Wizard, I think it's called, and it's so easy to set it up. It's just like the software tells you, hit the kick drum pad as hard as you can, and you do it. Then press OK, then go to the next pad. And if you go through that, everything is mapped and everything is, good to go. Now, Superior Drummer, for example, has a lot of presets in it. Like, I believe there are 20 different companies, all Roland kits, Pearl kits, Millennium kits, and all of that. And you just select a preset and it works. So one thing to mention here, I would never change the MIDI mapping presets inside of the module, because then these presets won't work.
Ah, okay. You got to leave the module like it is, and then okay, so that it matches the presets. Except for having like an eDrum Wizard like that, then it detects whatever you're hitting right now, which is great. I mean, I love Room Sound for various reasons, and this is just one more. They did a good job at that. I don't think the older libraries have it, though. I might be wrong, but I think they implemented this in the new Kurt Ballou library, and maybe the old one's got an update, but I don't remember them having this. So, but yeah, the new one definitely has. Do you have to do a lot of adjustments later? So let's say you did the setup, or you chose a preset in Superior Drummer or wherever. Do you then have to like adjust things of like how far the hi-hat opens, or I don't know. I'm just thinking about things that could possibly go wrong. Do you have to adjust things later and fine-tune until it feels right?
If the sampler gives you these options, you can definitely do that. Like Superior Drummer gives you the option to very detailed options there. I think the hi-hat controller pedal setup is also in this eDrum Wizard of the Kurt Ballou library, I think. Yeah, but hi-hats in general are a bit difficult on electronic drum kits, because real hi-hats are so detailed. They have so much nuances and so many different sounds out of this metal plate, right? Digital pads are way better, but they're also expensive, right? I know the Roland digital hi-hat pad is about $800, and that's crazy. But they're good, right?
Do you have to worry about like the size of the pads, or how you set it up so that it feels like what you're used to from drums? Because I remember the few times that I played on electronic drum kit, one of the things that was always weird for me was the small pads. and like where they are positioned, and it always felt like a little, very narrow, and I was like concentrating on actually hitting the pads. Like maybe that's just a mental thing and not really an issue, because you should hit a real drum close to the center anyways, but it always felt like I had to concentrate on actually not missing them or setting them up so that the distance didn't seem correct. Like, is there something, the way you mount it or whatever, is there something to pay attention to?
Yeah, at least for me, that's a big issue. And that's probably the main reason why I got this stereo pad, a snare, because it had 12 inches, I think. And I rarely used the rim articulation, but it had the right size. And it was 12 inches, and that's enough. Not 14, but it's better than a 7-inch rubber pad.
Malcolm, do you have any experience with playing on Econs like that?
I have so little experience playing on both real drums and e-kits. I just don't have a lot of drumming experience. I wish I had more. Honestly, if I had one more room in the place I live, I would own a drum kit without a doubt. But there is no room. But it seems from what Thomas is saying that the more familiar you are with playing drums, and Thomas, you're probably very used to your acoustic kit, the more it kind of matters to making sure that what you're playing on, like your e-kit setup, feels natural. So finding the right size for your snare, for example. But I'm sure there's also other people out there that have started with e-kits, and like the little sizes are exactly what they're used to, which is kind of fascinating to think. It does make me think, this is a little off topic, so we won't get too into it, but I've had drummers come into the studio that rehearse on e-kits, and then they come into the studio to play on like real acoustic kits without getting used to that again. And it's kind of a little bit of a learning curve for them, because I think the feel's different enough that it affects your playing. Do you agree with that, Thomas?
Yeah. And the other way around too. Yeah, it's
of course
always a bit challenging, because when you sit on an electronic drum kit, you have to think of things like, how high do I have to raise my hand to have tip articulation on the heads? And actually, that's stuff I don't want to think about when I'm recording. So that's a bit annoying, but it's practical to do it.
Okay, got it. So one thing that I noticed a couple of times when I was touring with my band back then, there was like in the late 2000s, we were playing, and like early 2010s stuff. We were playing with a lot of metalcore bands, and some of these had either triggers on their real kits live, or they had a mesh kick drum or something with them live and used a trigger kick drum, and the rest was acoustic, for example. And what I noticed with some of those drummers was they were using either one shots or very not very dynamic samples. And I noticed they were playing, not all of them, but some of them had pretty sloppy playing, and they just didn't hit really hard, just because the sample always sounded killer and like a heavy hit, but actually they didn't really hit very hard. And I always thought, what happens when those people have to play a real kick drum? Like, this would sound terrible. They don't really, it's just super soft and like very sloppy, but it works because the samples were so just one shots are just out of the box great. So what do you think, Thomas? Is it possible to set up a kit that it's like an electronic kit that it is about as dynamic as a real kit, so you can get the really quiet ghost notes and you really have to hit hard if you want a hard sound? Or is it always kind of cheating because you have limited dynamic range and you can, play a little sloppier and still get a good performance?
So that's I'll answer your question, but that's the main reason why I'm not recommending people to learn playing the drums on electronic drum kits, because you simply can't just turn up or down the volume if you want to. Now, even like the cheap Roland module has good dynamics. You can set that up inside of the module, and I found myself just limiting myself a little bit in the dynamics because I wanted a more consistent recording.
You can use it to your advantage.
Yeah, of course, you can have all the dynamics, right? Even in the cheaper modules.
I was impressed by the ghost notes on the snare, for example, on that song that I mixed today, because those were really natural, really dynamic, also not the same every single time. So they just sounded like a real snare would. And hearing that you were recording this on a cheap kit like that is actually pretty cool. because that's one of those things that makes a drum kit sound real, right? Those types of dynamics. But you can also, as you said, use it to your advantage and limit the dynamics in a way to get a more consistent performance right out of the box, sort of, and like as a good starting point. Which is great because you're likely to do that anyway when you edit the MIDI and you want to get the final sort of performance right. So you can cheat a little bit, but as long as you know how to play dynamically, if you want to. I have so many questions, but Malcolm, feel free to ask some too. I just have so many questions at the top from the top of my head. One more thing that comes to mind is it actually loud in the room to play a kit like that, especially the rubber pads? Because one reason why people get a kit like that is that they want to annoy their neighbors, or they just can't record a real drum kit in there. But I always had the impression that some of those kits, like just the sound of hitting those pads, is still like pretty loud, and you can't really do that in some flats or like under certain circumstances. Do you agree with that, Thomas? Or is there a way to make it quieter? Mesh heads probably are quiet, but I always found it's pretty loud still.
Yeah. It's there's definitely a difference between mesh heads and rubber pads. Of course, you have a surface that gives you rebound. It gives you better rebound, and it's still loud. Of course, my neighbors will hear when I play. So we live next to each other in a big house, but they of course will hear. Imagine you take a wooden stick and hit some kind of material like that. Yeah, you're gonna hear that, and it's probably not quieter as a converted acoustic kit. So if you take mesh heads and apply it to your normal acoustic kit, it's probably not louder to that.
Okay. Now let's talk about that in a second, like the whole converting a kit, an actual kit, into like a hybrid setup or something, because that is interesting too, and like alternative ways to do it. But before we do that, what do you, just real quick, and we don't get into this too much in depth because we have a different episode on like MIDI drums in general, but what do you do after you've like set it up all correctly? You played it, you captured the MIDI. Do you end up getting one stereo MIDI track on your computer, or do you get one MIDI track for every single shell or cymbal, or what does that look like? And what do you do with that then? Do you just treat it like any programmed MIDI kit and edit the performance and choose samples and stuff? Like, what does that look like? Is there any extra step you have to do after you've captured the MIDI?
Okay, I have one MIDI file where everything is in. So there's the kick drum, the snare drum, every tom, and it's a good idea to label that. So the MIDI note where your toms are actually named tom 1, tom 2, tom 3, and so on. And then I would do some timing adjustment, quantizing stuff, then some velocity adjusting. If you want the snare to be like super dynamic, you can leave it like it is, or you can adjust that. If you want it to be pretty hard all the time, you can adjust the velocities like that. You can, of course, like adjust articulations. You can add a tom, for example, or add a crash cymbal if your sampler has more crashes like you have in on your electronic drum kit. You can do that. And yeah, that's basically it, I think. And of course, you can copy-paste parts like that. Yeah.
Okay. And from there, it's basically like treating any other MIDI drum kit and in the computer.
Right.
Cool. Now, is one thing that I still keep thinking about is like one thing that I wanted to ask is, some people told me, and I haven't had this experience myself, but some people told me that some of those kits are kind of unreliable when it comes to picking up wrong, quote unquote, wrong hits. So that you might want to hit the first tom, but it triggers the second one also if they're close to each other. Or the whole rack or whatever mount you have is kind of rattling and it triggers all kinds of things at the same time, and they can't really get rid of that. Is that an issue only with like cheaper kits, or is there a way to adjust that or work around that? Because I've heard a couple people complain about that. My brother, for example, took him a long time to get his drum kit set up so that he could accurately play tom fills without all kinds of drums being triggered at the same time.
Yeah, I can think of two solutions here. One would be to have a stand for every pad, right? So a snare stand. So get rid of that typical black like rack where every tom and every cymbal is mounted on the same rack. That's one way. of course. Another way would be to have a module that is capable of some crosstalk settings. So you can, basically set a threshold where the vibration of the hit of another pad you've just hit is below that threshold, and so the pad won't react. The another pad
it's like a sensitivity threshold
vibrations. Yeah, something like that.
Okay,
right.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
But it's always a good idea to have the pads on separate stands. So the module I have, for example, the TD1, has no features like that, no crosstalk. So I have a snare stand, I have a cymbal stand, and a hi-hat stand.
Okay, that's a good idea. Malcolm, do you have any questions about the whole setup thing and the actual recording part of it? Because before we dive into like alternatives or like hybrid setups and all that type of thing?
I guess maybe this is rewinding a little bit, but we talked about monitoring your drum sounds, and I think you probably do have to have a pretty great computer to monitor like a VST in your computer in real time while recording it, I would think, because like Superior Drummer is pretty CPU heavy as an example. So is there an easy way for people to just monitor their E-kit while recording, like off the module brain of their drums while recording in, but with the goal of using different sounds later?
Yeah, of course, you can monitor yourself through the brain, through the module. You just have to make sure that you also hear the playback you want to play with. So maybe your module has a aux in where you can use your phone to listen to the music you want to play to. One thing you have to make sure is that the grid and the tempo in the DAW you're recording to is the same like the song you're playing to. That's very important. And especially in the case of Superior Drummer, there are two tricks you can do if you want to have live monitoring. It has a switch from 24-bit samples to 16-bit samples, and you can disable all the bleed. So that makes live monitoring a bit easier. And after you've recorded, you can switch on for 24-bit samples again.
Ah, that's good. Yeah, I was thinking about that too, because it would be kind of hard to not monitor through the computer, for me at least, because I would love to hear the click coming from the session and then the scratch tracks and all of that. And so, but yeah, if there's like a low latency mode where you can like just turn off certain features while you're recording, that would probably fix it. That's a good point here. Because yeah, the bleed settings in those VST drums are what like use a lot of CPU and also RAM, because so many samples are layered on top of each other at the same time to make sure that this happens. So if you can turn that off, that's definitely helping. Or is there a way, Thomas, to just monitor through the DAW with the click and the backing tracks and all of that, and also plug in the physical outputs of the module into the interface to just, monitor that through the computer or the interface too, and then also capture the MIDI. So in case the VST doesn't work, you could still go through the DAW and monitor the analog outputs of the kit through the interface. That's maybe a solution that could work.
Yeah.
Right.
I just thought about that workaround too.
I want to double down on what Thomas said about making sure that you have the tempo and meter selected in your DAW before you start recording, because like that is at least in Pro Tools, that would be a disaster if you forgot to do that. Like if you just had to make a default session is at 120 and you track the song to that and you're like, oh wait, it's meant to be 150, and you're like it might not go to plan when you speed it all up, or if worse yet, if you're using like an offline click in the module or something, there's potential for disaster there. So have that all determined and figured out in advance. Save you some headache.
Oh yeah. Oh, totally. That would be a nightmare. Yeah. All right, cool. So, okay, that's it for the tracking part, I think. And as always, people, let us know if you have follow-up questions on that, and we're happy to ask Thomas and answer them. And also, by the way, sorry if this conversation is not as like smooth as usual. We have a brutal delay here on our system, and I hope Wayne can like work this out in editing a little bit.
Sorry, Wayne.
It's kind of hard to do.
I think it's going to be tough.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be tough, but I'm sure you're going to make it work somehow.
Thomas, I got a question for you. I'm wondering how much time you spend tracking versus editing, like what the ratio is, because compared to acoustic recording, it's so important to play it right, because the editing is kind of limited in what you can fix. But with MIDI, you could do it all by editing. You could do it all with a mouse if you really had to. It's just very time consuming. So I'm wondering, do you just kind of try and get like a really good take down, like just one good full pass, and then you take it from there on the computer, or do you still work hard to nail the performance and then just do a little bit of editing? Like, what's the ratio there? Is it different than how you approach acoustic drums?
My way of doing that is, so let's say I get a demo from somebody who wants to have recorded drums. I listen to that demo a few days in advance, like 3 to 4 times. And then I set up the DAW, I set up my drum kit, and then I record part for part most of the times. And let's say there's a verse and then there's a break. So I would record the verse like 3 or 4 times until it feels right. And then I would immediately go in and edit that performance, because I still know what I played. I still know what I want to change and the way I want it, stuff like that. And after I've done that, I go to the next part. And that's basically the way I recorded all of the songs.
Cool. So it's a section by section.
Yeah, right. Section by section. Immediately edited everything, till it felt right. Then moved on.
Okay, so but that is something you can do when you do it on your own for yourself, because you can move you can go back and forth between playing and editing and so on. I imagine if you were working with an artist, or if you are like the producer in your band and you're tracking your drummer, it would probably be kind of a weird flow, or like people would have to agree to do that, because like play a part and then edit everything and then play the next part and then edit everything. It's kind of a stop and go thing. You know, once they're warmed up, they have to stop again. So I think that could be challenging when working with other people. If you're doing it on your own, I can totally see though why it makes sense, because it's like still fresh in your mind and you just, you know exactly what went wrong, can edit it and then move on. But is there ever a problem for you when it comes to, in terms of flow, to do these constant interruptions, basically, and always warm up and cool down?
No, not at all. It's no problem at all.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, I can imagine working with someone else that not everybody would want to do that way, or it could cause problems. But I can also see why it makes sense. So let's talk about like the alternatives here real quick before we wrap it up, because that's something that I think is really interesting. You could, in theory, set up like real cymbals plus pads, right? For example.
Yep. You could record cymbals with a stereo overhead pair of or close mics and use just pads for the shells. Of course, there are drummers out there who do that.
Yeah, would you have to use mesh heads because the rubber attacks maybe sound a little hard and weird and loud?
So my experience with this is that, the rubber pads are super noisy. I know people that have made it work, and I honestly don't know how they do it, but I find that like the clickety-clack of the rubber pads is like totally all over my overheads. Maybe I just crush my overheads more than other people do, but I haven't really gotten it to work in a way that I'm happy with. I've done the replacing the kick drum with a pad before and had success with that. But as far as the ones being hit by sticks, I don't like it.
I think replacing the kick drum is actually a very good idea. You can do so much. You have so much flexibility in like editing the kick, and it's pretty easy to get that out of the. Works surprisingly well actually to get that out of the overheads. So especially for metal, I think having a mesh kick pad, or like another mesh, like a MIDI kick pad, and the rest of the kit real, that's a good solution actually. And for some of those genres, it's clear from the beginning that you're going to use samples anyway. So I think that's a good approach for a lot of people.
Another approach that I think actually works better, it's just a little more time consuming and drummers don't like it as much, is recording the whole kit electronically, deleting the cymbals, and then setting up the cymbals and recording them on their own. Because then there's cymbals without any bleed at all, and you've got the backup cymbals of MIDI information as well. And when I say delete, I mean hide and make inactive kind of thing. But yeah, record an entire performance electronically, and then mute and re-record whatever you need acoustically.
Totally, that's a good approach too. What about the thing you said, Thomas, where you would replace the actual drum heads on a real kit with mesh heads on the acoustic drums?
Yeah, right. There are some hardware triggers out there that are often used in live situations, and you can also use them for you can plug those things onto your acoustic shell, and it will create a MIDI note that there are some brains for that too, who just have the connectivity for that triggers, and they will send MIDI information to your computer. And I never tried that and how good the dynamics are there, but I think there are some modules from ddrum that can do that.
I did that. I did that with the triggers on actual drums before. But what I never did was swap out the drum heads for mesh heads. Like, why would you do that? Just to get the drums quieter, so you can. Is that the reason for why you want to do that? Like, low volume kit overall, basically.
That's the main reason. If you're in an apartment and want a low volume kit. And you can also have some low volume cymbals that are the cymbals with the crazy amount of holes in it, just for being quiet.
Okay. What you can also do, and this is something I think it's good that you put it in the outline there, Thomas. You could mic, like if you have a jam space where noise is not the problem, but the problem is that you can't track real drums for other reasons. Maybe you don't have like decent mics, or you just don't have enough experience, or it just doesn't sound right, and you want to do it MIDI for other reasons. Then what you could do is you could mute your drums as much as possible, or put mesh heads on it, as you said, and you could close mic, or like you could just leave the heads on, actually muted, just so you get a lot of attack, and then really close mic those drums, and put a pair of overheads for the cymbals up, and then make sure that you really just get the accurate attacks, but not really a tone from the drums, and you make them quiet, and then you can convert that audio information from the close mic'd shells to MIDI in the computer, and mute the original audio, and then just layer samples there. Like you can do that with like properly tracked drums too. But if you really feel like the drums aren't helping and you want to get rid of them, and you want like as little of them as possible in the overheads, you could just mute the hell out of the drums basically, and stick the mic as close to it as possible to capture the attacks, and then convert it to MIDI, and then put your samples on it. That's also something you could do. I haven't really done that a lot, but I know some people who have, and I could see it work. I'd say be careful though, because you could end up having like some really weird sounding drums still in the overheads, and I don't have a lot of experience with that, but you could do that. That's what I'm saying. Did you ever do something like that, Malcolm?
It's something I've done with kick drums quite a bit. It's honestly, I hope nobody listens to this and gets offended, but it's something that when I'm like not feeling very confident about their consistency with their kick, or their accuracy and timing with their kick, I generally try and hide the kick as much as I can, because I know that I might have to fudge it a little bit to make it sound rock solid. And so by removing that from the rooms and the overheads as much as possible, pretty much means that I can use my rooms and overheads still, because if it's too loud in that, the rooms and overheads almost become useless if the kick is not doing the job correctly. Because a soft kick and a loud kick sound very different in the room, just as much as they sound different on the close mic. So if we're going to fully replace them, we need them to not ruin all the other mics as well.
Yeah, I mean that could definitely work. I don't know how accurate. When you mute the hell out of drums like that, I feel like sometimes the stick attack can also be a little different, and you got to make sure that you actually
totally can
capture accurate attacks. That's the thing you have to worry about, that you get all the hits right, and especially the ghost notes and stuff like that.
It's tricky, and again, it's kind of the only something I've pulled off on a kick drum, like never on a snare or something like that.
That's the thing. Drums is such a complex instrument. Like if you put stuff inside a drum and mute it, or put a lot of stuff onto the head to mute it a lot, then the whole thing just reacts differently, and you might not capture the proper dynamics, or like the hits the way you want to capture them. It just changes everything if you do that. But just know that there's always an option. There's always ways to work around not being able to record the actual drums. And apparently you can get affordable electric drums, like Thomas said, or you can convert parts of your actual kit into electric drums. Just know that it is an option, and know that it can sound absolutely phenomenal. You just have to think about what you want to get out of it and how you can achieve that. But it is possible, and if you spend the time to get the dynamics right, to get the settings right, to use the proper samples in the DAW and all of that, there should always be a way. And I think whatever you end up doing, it's always more fun to try and do that versus like drawing in the MIDI notes with a mouse or using a small controller, a keyboard or something, which can work. I do that all the time. But honestly, if I would have like an E-kit next to me here, that would be fun. I'd love to do that sometimes. So
Totally, yeah.
I think it's a good alternative. Now, is there ever a situation, that would be my final question for you guys, is there ever been a situation in your case where you felt like using an electric kit led to worse results in a way, or like actually programming it was better or using a keyboard was better because it just felt terrible, or some other downside that I haven't thought about? Is there ever a situation where it's not a good idea to do that?
No. I think it's always a good idea to use it if it makes more fun and if the results while you're tracking are better. And I can't see a reason why they should be worse, really. Do you, Malcolm?
The only issue I can think of, and this is going back to like me just getting started in recording, is not considering all the variables that you need to consider when you're building a recording chain. So, and we covered some of these today already. So it's like, oh, I've got an E-kit, we'll just record to that. And then drummer comes over and I'm like, oh wait, how's he going to hear the drums we're recording? I got to figure out how to send audio back to him, or we'll just use the kick drum. Oh wait, now he's playing the drums and he can't hear the kick drum because that's like, it's an acoustic kit, but there's one E module in there and I've got to get him to monitor that. So like those little things were the only hiccups I could think of. It's just like, oh, I didn't consider how to problem solve that ahead of time. And now the drummer's just playing without a drum in their headphones. That's weird, right? So always trying and make sure that the drummer feels like they're playing what they're usually playing. They're hearing what they're actually doing. You can't expect them just to like smack pads and hear just a metronome in their headphones.
Oh yeah. Totally. That's a good one actually. The whole monitoring thing is, I can see that become like that's a challenge in and of itself, I think, in other cases. But yeah, I think there's no, like, if you can do it, there's no real downside, right, to just using the electronic kit.
One thing I wanted to add to all of this is that with that audio to MIDI conversion, you can actually swap out the whole kit, including cymbals. And if you want to do that, it's actually pretty cool because you can record your acoustic drum kit, close mic'd everything, the kick, the snare, the hats, the ride, the crashes, and you can then convert all of this to MIDI. You can send this into a drum sampler and it will give you everything, like the hats, the ride, the crashes. And a good thing to convert that, a good program, is the tracker that's inside of Superior Drummer, because it's actually built for that. So I think they advertise it like, throw a stereo recording of your drums into tracker and it will give you all the MIDI notes. And I've tried that and it actually works pretty good.
Yeah, I'm always really impressed by that tracker feature. But just to make sure I got this right, you saying you can also like convert cymbals easily? Because I never had success with that really. How does it do that?
So the way I tried it, I had a mono overhead and I recorded a bunch of grooves, and I set the tracker to listen to a hat sound, and he gave me a lot of MIDI notes every time I played the hats. And the only thing I had to do was to change the articulations from shank to tip and open the hats, for example. Yeah, that works with tracker.
Wow. So I guess you're going to get better results the more you close mic things, right? The more information you give it, the easier time it's going to have identifying what cymbal's being played, for example. But it's impressive that it can do the job at all with a mono or stereo track. That's incredible.
My questions have been answered, so thank you, Thomas. I know a lot more now than I did before. So Malcolm, what about you?
This just reminded me of a video I saw ages ago where some fellow on YouTube put together an E-kit using like piezo mics on pieces of cardboard. So it was just like a bunch of cardboard arranged like a kit. But because it was just sending triggers to a module or a brain or a MIDI, he was able to kind of make like an E-kit out of cardboard.
I saw that too. I think it was, what was it? Was it with the slate samples? Can that be?
I can't
saw something like
remember.
that too, where he used a drum stool as a kick drum and then some cardboard whatever things for the shells or something. I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, pretty funny. So really, if you've got the equipment, you can make it out of anything. But which is funny.
So one thing I wanted to give to people is a YouTube channel I found. It's from a guy called Justin, I think, and his YouTube channel is called 65 Drums. And it's incredible what he does. He has basically a video on everything, on every topic you can think of related to electronic drums. Converting acoustic kits to electronic drums, buying a cheap drum kit, buying expensive drum kits, using VST instruments with all kinds of different electronic drum kits. So check this guy out if you want to know more about all of this.
Awesome. Really cool. Like what's it called again? 65 Drums?
65 Drums on YouTube. That's his channel.
Awesome. Check it out.
We're going to put that in the show notes. Thank you. I want to also say one thing. If you got your hands on our drum editing course that Thomas made for us, it should be out by the time this episode airs. And if so, you've probably heard a little introduction to it at the top of this episode. And if you got your hands on that and you've checked out the course, you'll have noticed that we're not talking about MIDI drums, but there's a section on like creating hit points from audio drums and like how to quantize drums. It's a drum editing course, right? So that's part of it. And those same principles and what Thomas did there is basically apply also when you convert your audio drums into MIDI, or it's basically also what Tracker does, just in an automatic way, in a way. So having a basic understanding of drum transients and how to detect them, how to mark them. Like in Cubase, it's called hit points. In Pro Tools, it's called, I don't know what they call it, but Beat Detective also like detects the transients, or there's a tap to transient feature. But there's a way to like detect those hits, and then once you've done that, you can turn that information into MIDI, and that's basically what all of these tools do. Like even the electronic kits, like they detect the hit when the stick hits the pad, convert that hit point to a MIDI note, and then feed it to the computer or the module. So if you have a basic understanding of that, it will all make more sense to you, I think. And so I highly recommend checking that out if you haven't. And if you already have it, check out the portion about like creating hit points and what to do with them, because that is the easy way to convert your drums into MIDI drums, even if you don't have a fancy program like the Tracker. Right, Thomas? So that's something you can do.
Right.
Cool. All right. So, any more things you want to add to this?
One final question.
Yeah.
Did you see my self-recording band screensaver on my TV?
I have the video off. I didn't see it.
No, I didn't see it.
Oh, let me turn the video on again. No, I just see the vertical version of you.
Yeah, I can't get you.
Let me just. Oh yeah. There, I see a TV, but I don't see the screensaver, unfortunately, because it's blurry. Maybe people on YouTube can see it. I don't know if like making this bigger also affects the recording of the video. If not, sorry, you probably just see the vertical version of Thomas here. Do you have you made a screensaver?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Thomas is prepared. Thomas is prepared.
Describe it for the listeners. What is it? Because I can't see it either.
Okay. No. In the background, there's this ugly TV, and I thought, it looks ugly. How can I make this funny and cool? And I just made a self-recording band screensaver. I just downloaded Benny's logo from his website and thrown it into DaVinci. White background and this typical movement of the logo.
Yeah.
Like
is it bouncing around? That's awesome.
Yeah.
And funny. It's a 2-hour video of your logo. Yeah.
That's funny, Thomas. I had no idea. I didn't see it. I just saw the vertical version of you. Now I had to expand the video, and now I see it. But it's so blurry, I can't actually see it. But maybe, Wayne, maybe you can just zoom in and show it to people on YouTube. As always, guys, you can also watch this on YouTube, not just your favorite podcast apps, but on YouTube too. And so, yeah, then let's wrap it up. Thank you, Thomas, for doing this.
Yeah,
thank you, Malcolm,
Thomas,
for taking the time too.
Of course.
Awesome. And if you are new to the show, I hope you got value out of this. Be sure to check out all of our other episodes. It's like 164 at this point, which is kind of crazy. Yeah, wow. And if you are already a listener, then thank you for coming back and for sticking with us for so long. I know there are some people who've listened to every single episode. You're legends if you made it that far.
Crazy.
Yeah, thank you so much for sticking with us. Yeah, be sure to subscribe, make a screenshot of the episode, post it on social, tag us. We love to see that at Malcolm Owen Flood, at Benedictine, at the Self-Recording Band. I don't think Thomas has any socials, right? You're like sort of the undercover, Dr. Drums in the lab type of guy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Our secret weapon at the Self-Recording Band.
Yeah, exactly. But be sure to tag us. We love to see that. We love to reply to those too. And if you have any questions about this topic, feel free to reach out and let us know, and we'll ask Thomas, and we're happy to answer those for you. All right. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for showing up and doing this with me. And talk to you next week.
See you next week. Thanks again, Thomas.
Yeah.